Welcome, everyone. This is the session to talk about the Metaverse and Web3. And we're going to have two distinguished guests, Adrian Cheng and Yat Siu, who will explore some of the frontiers of the latest technology in the Web3 world. And they will talk about what they have been doing in this space, especially how they conceptualize the metaverse. First, I would like to just spend a few minutes to introduce Adrian Cheng and also Yat Siu, because they have done so many things in their career that are contributing to society and also contributing to the metaverse. Adrian, most of you know him as the CEO of New World Development. New World today is not only a property company, but under Adrian's leadership, the company has expanded into retail, healthcare, education. And Adrian, as many of you know, has a passion for art and culture. He is the founder of K11, which is a concept that combines art, retail, and hospitality. And he's taking that concept to expand into over 10 cities in China. And he's also very active in the philanthropic world. The K11 Art Foundation supports and promotes Chinese artists and their works. As many of you know, that New World Development has been very philanthropic as well. They've a few years ago announced that they were going to donate 3 million square feet of agricultural land to help the government to develop public housing. The most recent time I spent time with Adrian was I visited the State Art Theater, which his company acquired. The State Art Theater is a very old building. I believe it was started back in the 1950s as the Empire Theater in Hong Kong, where people went to the movies, went to the cinema. And the building is in North Point. And Adrian bought the building for the purpose of preservation of the Hong Kong heritage. And more recently, Adrian has launched his investment operation. He has a firm called C Ventures that invests in fashion, media, lifestyle, retail, but also he is now expanding his investments into the metaverse, into blockchain type companies, which we'll cover. We'll talk about that. This month, his interest in art is taking him into an art exhibition. He's hosting an NFT art exhibition featuring over 200 pieces of NFT art. And some of that is being displayed in Hong Kong. Adrian is a trustee of the Royal Academy of Arts. He's on the advisory committee of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And also he's a trustee of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. So he's very steeped in the art world, and he'll talk about NFTs. And switching to Yat Siu, introduction of Yat. I knew Yat from maybe 20 years ago when I first started Alibaba, because Yat was one of the first entrepreneurs in Hong Kong that really did something significant. In fact, back then, nobody knew anything about cloud computing, but Yat started a firm called Outblaze to provide web-based services and cloud services, such as providing emails service to enterprises. And later on, he sold that business to IBM for a lot of money, I think. And Yat today is the co-founder and chairman of Animoca Brands. Animoca is a blockchain gaming company, but under the Animoca umbrella, Yat has also invested in a lot of blockchain projects, NFT companies. I think his portfolio now spans over 200 investee companies, including some of the more interesting ones that we will talk about. Something that about Yat that you don't know about is that he is a classically trained musician. His passion for music and the arts, you wouldn't know because you think he is a sort of a tech guy. He's born from a family of musicians, and he actually right now is on the advisory board of BAFTA. That's the British Academy of Film and Television Arts. And he's on the board of director of the Asian Youth Orchestra. So something about Yat that most people don't know. So really two very distinguished guests. Welcome, Adrian and Yat. And are you guys ready to talk about the metaverse?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you for the introduction.
All right, good. So my first question, I will direct that to Yat. If you can explain to us, what do you mean by metaverse? What does it mean? And also from your screen, it looks like you're actually sitting in the metaverse. So tell us about that.
So the way that we define the metaverse is really a place where we can actually have true digital ownership in the things that we spend time with and sort of involve ourselves with online. When you think about today where the world is and where it really started, say 30, 40 years ago, in the early advent of pre-internet services like CompuServe and Genie Online and Delphi, we started actually already creating virtual experiences and virtual societies. A bulletin board, a message board, even things like Reddit are in fact forms of sort of micro societies, but they're in the virtual context. And today, after all of this time, we have now 4.6 billion people who are online every day, who are actually, if you think about it, digital dependents. Imagine your life today if you didn't have a mobile phone, if you couldn't access, your services on Alibaba or on Google or on Facebook, for instance, right? You actually have less ability to exist as a human being, if you think about it. You can't conduct business the same way. You can't actually have the same opportunities to make friends. You won't be as social because you're not online. So I would argue that we're already in a kind of pre-metaverse today. We may not think of it this way, but if you think about how many hours are you spending online, including this particular sort of video call, actually, it's probably more so than we care to admit. And so now what the true metaverse is from our definition is that we can have ownership in this. A lot of people talk about the metaverse as a way in which you can be more immersed, like VR and AR. And to us, these are platforms in which you can experience the metaverse. But just like any society, if we actually are sort of on borrowed time or on rented platforms, which is what most of the digital world is today, then it doesn't have any meaning for us. It's not a part of who we are. We can't actually own a piece of this. So the true metaverse is possible today because of non-fungible tokens, because of blockchain technology, because we can now own a piece of that, which I think we'll get on later, right? We have the ability to sort of construct in the experiences in a decentralized fashion, just as we have in the real world. We can build businesses in the metaverse. They can start off with virtual land, but they can be virtual, not just games, but like financial infrastructure. Everything that we see today with DeFi, for instance, as far as we're concerned, is infrastructure for the metaverse. And we also firmly believe that the future of work and the future of society actually rests on the metaverse, and it begins with ownership.
So it seems like what you mean by that is the concept of currently we are always living on someone else's platform, sort of borrowed time and borrowed platform. Like we're on Zoom right now, somebody else's platform. So in the future, we can own a piece of where we are and our imaginations.
Correct. Maybe to elaborate on that a little bit, the most valuable resource today on Earth is data. Right? It's perhaps more valuable than oil and any other kind of so-called natural sort of resource that we can dig up from the ground. And it doesn't take, you don't have to look too far into what these data-rich companies are worth. Take a look at the market caps of companies like Microsoft or Apple or Facebook, right? All of these, or Tencent, right? All of these companies actually have the most valuable resource at their disposal with one major benefit. They own it. But who provides that data? It is us as end users. We're using the platform. Every time we use Facebook, we enrich the platform because we add to the network effect. We contribute to its value. if all of us suddenly stop using Facebook, what's the value of Facebook? Not much at all. And yet here we are spending possibly 6 to 8 hours on Facebook every day, enriching the platform, but do we get paid for that? We don't, but we're contributing our data. So one way to say is, oh, but you're just there for enjoyment and entertainment. It ought to be free. Another way to think of this is that actually every time we're spending time on the platform, unknowingly or unwittingly, we're actually working for the platform. We're just free labor. So the platforms today, like Facebook, we consider them like digital kingdoms. We are all, in fact, digital serfs, and we have been digitally colonized, by surrendering our data and not receiving fair value. We make and we give value to Facebook. How much value does Facebook or any one of these platforms actually give back to us? The answer is almost nothing, right? And that's one of the reasons why, I think the digital world today is exploited. We don't actually own anything, on these platforms. Do you actually own your handle on Instagram? You've invested all this time to create a persona on Facebook or to create a persona on Instagram. But who has the power over this? Facebook can just take it away anytime they want, which is basically the equivalent of really just renting from someone, if you think about it. And so all that effort, all that time you put into it, all the customers that you've given and energy and attention you've given to Facebook, as an example, is not yours, right? And this, of course, is a problem, because just like in the physical world, if you don't actually have ownership in it, you can't construct innovation and new businesses on top of it, right? You can't go to a bank, and get a mortgage on a house that you don't own, right? But if you own the house, then a bank can give you a mortgage for 20, 30 years, for instance. Or someone can actually construct a business with some certainty because they know that it is theirs for basically forever, or for a sort of a very long period of time. So these are important constructs that don't exist in the digital world because we're constantly dependent on their rules of terms of service. If you're an app developer, I mean, even a company as large as Epic cannot get their apps on because of a disagreement.
Right.
Right.
So tell us about the project that you've launched in called the Sandbox. It is the digital land type of project, and I know that Adrian is actually developing something in that metaverse. So yeah, why don't you tell us a little about the Sandbox, and then I'll turn to Adrian to talk about what he's doing in the Sandbox.
Yeah, no, thank you. So Sandbox is, if you think of it, basically a sort of land-based virtual sort of metaverse. And there are some similarities if you look at it visually, like to Minecraft and Roblox. But what it really is a virtual place where people can build and construct their experiences, just like you have in the real world, but for virtual sort of, everyone online. And it's as a company, as a the Sand token, which powers essentially the economic infrastructure of Sandbox, is sort of worth in the billions at the moment in time. Virtual land itself is very valuable today, at least in the Sandbox. I liken the Sandbox a little bit like sort of the New York or the Hong Kong, perhaps, of the metaverse. We think there'll be multiple virtual societies like Sandbox, but Sandbox is kind of like the crown jewel, sort of, the most desirable place, because not only do you have sort of people like Adrian developing on it, but you have Snoop Dogg, you have The Walking Dead, you have all these celebrities and famous people as well, including yourself, of course, that basically own land in the Sandbox and are developing it for people to experience. And the main key difference is that, unlike a typical game where people play and sort of, then move and go somewhere else, is that everyone who is developing on the Sandbox actually owns a piece of that land, and they can develop it, and they have certainty that it is theirs because it's on chain, as in on the blockchain. And just like in the physical world, have the certainty of that ownership and can construct new experiences on it. So today, the Sandbox is a major employer of, metaverse architects, right? You have people who are developing on it for their full-time living. You have people who are playing the Sandbox and earning money. I mean, I think, the economic output of the Sandbox is somewhere in the, $200-300 million range a month at the moment, each month. In terms of sort of economic activity, which, if you think about it, is sort of the equivalent of like a small island nation, or perhaps something even bigger, but is consistently growing. So it is a true virtual society, if you will.
And to a question for Adrian is, what are you doing in the sandbox, and how do you think about the idea of owning a piece of digital land, and how is that different from your business in the real world, which is property development?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Actually, ironically, do you remember, Joe, when we were having cigar one night, you were the one who actually referred me to Sandbox. Did you remember that?
Oh, then maybe
You
I should
told me that
charge,
you bought a
I
piece of
should
land
charge a
at
commission then.
Sandbox. You told me that you were buying a piece of land, and I thought you were talking about a physical land, and I was like, okay, we should collaborate together. But then you told me, and then you started to explain to me the idea of Sandbox. You didn't know that, huh? You remember?
Maybe I had one too many cigars to smoke, so I
You were too high.
didn't remember. But I was in fact, when Yat referred to me owning a piece of land, in fact, it's actually the South China Morning Post that actually has the land in the sandbox, and we hope to bring a lot of the work of South China Morning Post, such as infographics, drawing up cities and landmarks in Hong Kong, and build that in the sandbox in a digital way. So yes, now I remember.
You remember, right? Thanks to you.
Right.
And I remember I was like, okay, I need to get a big piece of land bigger than yours next to your land. So then I started to, explore the idea of the virtual land. And then after that, I actually had a meeting with Yat. Yat, you remember we had a meeting in Mandarin?
I did. Yes, I do.
Yeah. And then we had such a great chat. And then I realized that it's so simple, ownership and also commercialization. Everything's going to be on Metaverse. And since I'm going to build such a big city in Greater Bay Area, especially in Shenzhen, I'm building I invested a lot of companies in Greater Bay Area. And I also have building a very big kind of a city within the city, K11 city concept in Greater Bay Area too. I thought in the future, Metaverse co-lives with the real world. So it's very normal to put everything that I had in Greater Bay and then merge it with the Metaverse. And at that time, Sandbox is, and now for now also is the only choice. And of course, because of Joe, I also thought, okay, I need to be next to him, so we can actually corner the entire island. So if you see my land, it's next to SCMP. So
In fact, Adrian make our land, SCMP land, more valuable because he's next to us.
Vice versa, and likewise. So Metaverse co-lives with the real world, and we see, the Metaverse as really just a digital extension, not a replacement. But I think we coexist. The physical world and the real world coexist together. No one can replace each other, but I think if people are spending more time with the Metaverse, but they're going to still spend time with the physical world, so you have to have this Metaverse and physical world connection, and I think that's the key. And for the Greater Bay Area Pavilion, we're going to put a lot of my investment companies and of course my K11 city, which physically is going to be in the Nanshan area in Shenzhen, and I'm going to put it also in the Metaverse in Sandbox as well.
So when you replicate the physical world, what you've invested in a lot of companies in the Greater Bay Area, you have K11, and you replicate that digitally in the Metaverse. What's the ultimate purpose, and how do you do more in the Metaverse to make your physical investments more valuable? For example, how do they interact? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so for example, we did you just mentioned that we hosted the one of the largest NFT exhibition, and if my Sandbox pavilion is ready, I can host it at the same time. We can connect seamlessly, because in the future there will be a much faster speed, and the latency will be much better. Everything will be very seamless in the experience, and I can do that. I can do experiences and also exhibition in the Metaverse as well. And for my companies that we invested, for example, like Castify, founded by West or Nothing, the design company founded by Carpe. We can all create a hub that exhibits these ventures as well, and also trying to showcase these entrepreneurs as well, and also their products too. For example, Nothing is they're building a new generation of mobile phones. Castify is also leading DTC tech accessories brand. So these we can actually do a fair. We can do exhibitions over there. We can also sell, in the metaverse as well, because Castify already have a big shop in all of my K11's outlet. So we just need the outlet that is in the metaverse. So I think it's important because as you and what Yat Siu was saying is that everyone's going to spend time in the metaverse. We need to find the right platform, and the Sandbox is the one that I think is one of the best. Yeah, and also the automation and the blockchain technology, bridging business into the metaverse with new services, products, and experiences will be the next exciting era.
Right. And turning back to Yat, I just have a question about this because Adrian talked about, I think he was joking about cornering the market. In fact, the Sandbox has lots and lots of digital land. So even though our pieces of land are probably bigger than some of the other participants in the bigger context of all the land that's available within the Sandbox, we're still small. But can you actually increase supply? Because theoretically, supply is unlimited, unlike the physical world where supply is limited. So how do you think about creating that supply-demand dynamic in the digital world?
So I think the first thing about Sandbox is that it's a fixed supply of land, right? So meaning that with Sandbox, there's only a certain amount of land that you can have, and there's sort of that scarce element of as to what makes the Sandbox, right? Now, if you think about the construction of cities in the world or societies in the world, you have the element of scarcity based on the network effects that are embedded within it, right? For instance, if you take a look at just in Hong Kong itself, why is it that the Peak, for instance, is so much more valuable than say, some other district in Hong Kong as an example? And, interesting enough, it's not even related to the same dynamics because it's not so, it's not like the Peak is heavily trafficked or that it is a place of great retail experiences, for instance, right? In fact, it's because maybe the prestige of the place or whoever else is there, the network effect of, the people who live there, the net influence of the people that are there, all of these things combined sort of add value to that, right? So within the Sandbox itself, you have these districts as well, as you talk about cornering the market. Well, in fact, you're adding value to each other because, the SCMP and Adrian are neighbors to each other. And in fact, the land around that has become more desirable, partially because of the prestige of the land and the network effect, but then also the attention because of the fact that you are owners of that particular land, because the SCMP is there, or because Adrian is there. People are paying more attention to that segment of that land because that's where the attention is. That's where more people might want to be, right? It's actually not that different from how it is in the physical world. Now, go ahead.
So in a way, what you're saying is some of the principles, in fact, a lot of the principles that we experience in the real world also apply in the metaverse. But what about some principles that are unique to the metaverse that you don't see in the real world?
Right. So I think one of the most interesting things about the metaverse in terms of the experiences being virtual is one, you don't have the same sort of factor of distance, right? Meaning that you could easily move from one place to another. On one hand, you could say, oh, well, doesn't that sort of defeat the purpose because I could just travel from one place to another. But on the other hand, because it's all on chain, you can actually really audit the sort of who is in that particular area, and you can see the history of that, and that can be verified instantly and on chain. Now, just think about like in the physical world, when you buy a piece of property, what that entails. Well, first of all, you have to go to a lawyer, you have to go to a contract, you have to do a notary, you have to do all these things. Actually, by the time, as efficient as Hong Kong is, from purchase to finish, there is a long chain of transactions that takes place, cost aside, right? That then gives you title and ownership of that land. But blockchain takes care of all of that in one instant. I can know who the previous owner was. I can see all the backgrounds and history around that. It is entirely auditable by third parties. And I can do that transaction literally in an instant, right? It's as liquid as buying, let's say, sort of like trading something on Alibaba or trading a stock, for instance, except that would be something like a title deed for a piece of land, right? So the friction and the speed is actually one of the reasons why it becomes so liquid, and why it also becomes also in many ways, you could say, more accessible, because our belief is that people are generally going to be existing in the metaverse in multiple places around the world, and where physical distance doesn't matter as much, but the let's call it the governance of those areas become the reasons why you're there, or who lives in those areas, like people who might want to live next to you, or next to Adrian. And one other maybe thing that is important to note is that the way that these virtual societies, these metaverses, are governed are through these decentralized autonomous organizations, which are entirely on chain as well. Because in the traditional sort of context of the digital world, these things disappear. If Facebook shuts down Instagram, everything you built on Instagram is lost, right? If the favorite game you're playing shuts down the game, the database, everything is gone, because it was never yours to begin with. But everything that is on chain lives forever. So that means that the governance and the structure of that is one that is now run by the community that owns it. So on Sandbox, you as an owner of land in Sandbox and owners of the token, you have a say in the future of the Sandbox. You have governance rights. You can direct it through a voting element as to where you want things to go. And there is no additional land supply. But for instance, if you wanted to create new constructions, or if you wanted to expand certain elements, then it is up to the community to vote on these matters. And even we, as a company that has helped create the Sandbox, actually, we may have a vote relative to our ownership, which is not majority in the future, in terms of token ownership. We can only have a say, but we are not the only person that has a say in all this. The entire community has a say in this. And that's the other thing that's really fascinating, because it provides a sort of a democratic principle in sort of running and operating these virtual societies that is the metaverse.
Now, turning to Adrian, Adrian, you've been at the forefront of observing trends, and some of your most prominent concepts like K11. You have said that you are catering to the millennials and Gen Z. So first, tell us a little bit about how you think Gen Z behavior and trends will influence the metaverse. And then the second question then is, what about people like me? I'm a little bit older. Does that mean I don't belong in the metaverse? And how would you say to some of the older generation people, how do you make that more inclusive to them?
Well, I think the Gen Z or the younger crowd is already influencing the metaverse, and that's why you have the metaverse. And echoing what Yat was saying, that you can see that it's evolving, and as long as you're getting younger and younger, they have new trends and paradigm shifts that will continue to influence the metaverse. I think the key is that Gen Zs are very important, and those that are younger, because they're all gamers and they're very digital savvy, and they're already in the metaverse. Whether it's Metaverse 1.0, now it's evolving to 2.0, but they're very used to it. They pay. If you look at all the kids, they're playing Minecraft, they look at Roblox. It's part of they're not watching normal cartoons right now. They're already immersed in the metaverse. So what we're seeing is that digital ownerships, how metaverse is running, whether it's the governance, what just I was saying, is something that they will slowly create new rule of games as they go older. So that will be evolving, and I think that's number one. Secondly, is that Gen Z is still going to be very important physically on the ground. So that's why the power of K11 is important, because even though they spend a lot of time on the metaverse, but they still want to experience with their five senses as well. So for them, identity is something that is important. So what we're trying to do is that you can have a second identity in a metaverse, but your primary identity may be on the physical world. So I think for a lot of brands that we talk to on the ground physically, we need to understand that the Gen Z or the younger generation are the most internet dependent generation and at the vanguard of technology. That's number one. A lot of brands, luxury brands that we talk to, we need to tell them that they should be opening to reshape the paradigm and to be ready to test and learn about this crowd. And also, Gen Z see their in-game identity as more of a true expression of who they really are than any other form. So they need to actually understand. A lot of physical brands or physical the world needs to understand that their true expression is through the in-game identity. And also brands can also help enable those forms of self-expression and really generate more deeper loyalty and connection with the Gen Z. And that's how we advise our brands in K11 to interact with the Gen Z physically too. So honestly, what brands want is to entice customer to express their identity, and I think the Metaverse becomes the best platform. And regarding to your question about being old, first, you're not old. You're the one who referred me to Sandbox. So you're much younger than me mentally, at least. I think, for example, the NFT art exhibition that we are doing, we have attracted 20,000 participants doing the tour and understanding what NFT is. And most of them are actually older generation because they're so curious to understand what's basically is the metaverse and what is NFT. Why is NFT such a hot topic? And why it's such an important arena that they need to understand? And for them, they're like, I want to invest in NFT. I want to understand what a metaverse is, but no one is teaching me because all my grandsons or all my sons and daughters are not things that I'm too old and they don't want to teach me. So we becomes a platform for not teaching them, but educating them and let them feel that this onboarding experience is easier. Okay, that's number one. So they think that for us, they feel trusted. We're credible and we're able to provide them with knowledge about a metaverse or NFTs. Secondly, is that I think for older generation, it's about the onboarding experience, meaning how do you open a MetaMask? How do you get a Phantom? How do you open a wallet? They feel unsafe because they're used to opening a wallet in the bank, but not in a metaverse. They think that, oh, I heard a lot of news about people, frauds and robberies online in the metaverse. I'm too afraid, blah, blah, blah. So cybersecurity is one of the biggest reasons why the older generations do not believe in crypto or they're not willing to open a wallet. So I think better protection, more secure lock-in, better onboarding experience, it's something that is, I think, will be important. And one of my companies called ARTA, ARTA, is actually, we're planning to create a new digital wallet and also entering the blockchain arena as well to hopefully help these non-crypto native buyers or customers. And they are a big, big, big potential. And that's why we are working with also, we're working with you on Sandbox later in June, right?
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
Adrian, it's actually, you touched upon a very important issue for the non-crypto natives here. People seem to have the impression that in the crypto world, because everything is digital, you can't touch and feel it. Things can disappear or get stolen or something like that. But the question, turning to Yat, is can you explain to us the idea of decentralization and why that is actually more secure than a centralized system? That I think that is something, it's a fundamental point. I think that's something for the sort of non-crypto natives to understand.
Absolutely. So the way that the blockchain functions, and the reason why it's called the blockchain, is that essentially every time there is a sort of a piece of sort of information or data, it appends to it and creates an immutable chain of history for that. And the first sort of biggest example that we've seen is Bitcoin. And of course, Bitcoin isn't necessarily what's powering the metaverse per se, but Bitcoin is an example of blockchain technology where you have this distributed ledger, which essentially acts as a way to prove sort of, the record of one or the other, but not just simply like sort of the ledger we have in accounting, which is just one sort of, input and one output as a reference point, but literally over millions of nodes around the world that basically record each and every transaction. So in effect, every person who has a Bitcoin, it keeps growing because it actually keeps every single transaction of every other Bitcoin transaction in this particular example in the world, within that particular sort of within the token. And that's also the reason why it keeps expanding, which basically also means that if you wanted to ever change or alter any aspect of the information that is on chain that is now distributed over millions and millions of nodes, you need consensus. How do you get that consensus? Well, you need to get 51% of all of the voting power, which in the case of Bitcoin or Ethereum would mean the hash rate, which is essentially the cryptographic approach in which they secure the network, which means essentially the mining power, or in a proof of stake network, such as Polygon or Flow, essentially the majority of the votes. To do that would be extremely expensive because you'd have to buy it all out. And it's much more secure than any kind of centralized database because there is not a single point of failure. Right? And the more decentralized and more distributed the network is, the more safer it is. So many of the hacks that we sometimes hear about, particularly for sort of young blockchains, comes from the fact that they only have maybe 9 or 10 or 20 validators, which means they have 20 points of validation, which means that if you could take control of, say, 11 out of the 20, you have majority consensus and you could do whatever you want, for instance. But if it's something like Ethereum or something like Bitcoin or something, sort of larger, then you have, millions of nodes or hundreds of thousands of nodes. And that decentralization basically gives it the sort of absolute security. Whereas in a centralized database, if I can social engineer my way into it, I can find a single point of failure and entry, and then basically I can just sort of subvert whatever information there is, delete or make changes. And just to add one interesting point here is about blockchain, because it's a public chain. You can audit every transaction. You can see everything, the good and the bad. When you look, for instance, as a money system, the central banking system, you actually don't really know how much is in circulation unless the central bank tells you. You have no real idea, sort of, outside of the trust that you have in government or the Federal Reserve or whichever organization it is that's basically saying we're minting this, we're creating this much, and this is how much is in supply, and this is how we're handling it, right? There is no necessarily public accountability, but with blockchain, whatever is created and minted is essentially there for everyone to see, right? And while not every person will analyze it, it is there as a public record in a ledger that also is immutable and cannot be changed.
I want to just touch upon one topic, which is sort of a criticism of blockchain. Yat, you've talked about the consensus mechanism, and especially in the Bitcoin, the protocol requires proof of work, which actually eats up a lot of computing power, which then eats up a lot of energy. So people are criticizing that the blockchain is environmentally unfriendly. So in the context of, year 2020, 2030, 2050, a lot of countries and organizations are going carbon neutral. How do you address that question? And how do we make blockchain more efficient from a ESG standpoint?
So I think there's multiple approaches. I think the most common approach that a lot of people are talking about, which is where Ethereum is going and where many of the L2s, layer 2 protocols are, already, such as Polygon or so, is this consensus mechanism known as proof of stake. And proof of stake blockchains essentially function in the same way as all other blockchains, except that it is not as computing heavy because you're not actually using mining power to secure the network. You're actually using essentially your proof of stake as your ownership, as in a voting power. And that means, the cost to compute that algorithmically is very, very low. I mean, I think on Polygon, the entire network is the cost of, I don't know, like, the energy consumption of 5 cars or something like that, right? It's not very high, right? And then of course, you can sort of remediate that with carbon offsets, right? What some of the proof of work people will tell you is that the majority or a large part of Bitcoin mining eventually, so it currently is already, and eventually move to sort of, green energy. There could be some criticisms around it, but the point is that as the energy resources become also more efficient in itself, it's not that energy creation is going to be the same way as it is today, right? Then that form of energy store will also end up becoming efficient in and of itself, right? So there's multiple vectors. The energy production is efficient, and the cost and the energy consumption will become and is already becoming more efficient. So that's the general thing. But one thing I do want to add here, which is that in order to run a consensus network, you need to have a cost, right? Because if there is no actual cost, then you don't have anything to pay for that network, right? And if you don't have anyone paying for that network, then it has to be centralized, or there has to be an incentive for people to operate that, to either maintain the stake or to maintain the computing power. And the example I put of it is that because it is a governance system, right? Blockchain itself isn't just a database system. It embodies with it a governance system, right? Whether you want to call it democratic, or whether you want to, whatever system that may proof of authority is a little bit more sort of on the authority side. But either way, there's a cost to running that consensus. And just like we have in governments, there is a cost, right? The cost of sort of maintaining our government comes with the judiciary, comes with the police force, comes with people that operate it, a bureaucracy that maintains order, right? The same is true for blockchain. So there has to be a mechanism of cost, right? Without it, it won't be sustainable as well. But in the combination of all of this, of course, it becomes more efficient. It's a lot of doomsayers will say, well, look how much energy it's consuming. If this keeps growing, we're all going to sort of burn to the ground. It's like saying that if you compare the energy consumption of and energy efficiencies of cars and coal factories 100 years ago, and you project that every person in the world will have a car with the same kind of cost of consumption, then yes, we would be in trouble. But of course, that's not true. Technology always tends to improve, always tends to be more efficient. Just taking a look at where we have been with our own efficiencies of energy consumption over the last literally just sort of several decades. So I'm generally optimistic that through the use of technology, improvements in the stack itself, we will get to sort of a very, very energy efficient approaches.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And we're almost out of time, but before we leave the audience, I'd like to just turn back to Adrian. You are exhibiting NFTs, you're putting that into a physical exhibition. So when you look at NFTs, what kind of NFT art do you appreciate? What's your favorite NFT art? And by the way, just advertising, where can people see your NFT exhibition? Where do they go?
Okay, so the NFT exhibition is at K11 Musea in Hong Kong. We have 200 NFTs, actually from 60 collectors. We're doing tours every single day, and currently we already have 20,000 people already participating in the tours. And it was just very, very exciting because a lot of people, a lot of curiosity, and a lot of people calling us and say, we want to learn about it, we don't understand it. And we have crypto natives and also non-crypto natives, young people, older people also are joining and understanding NFTs. For me, NFT is a community. I think NFT is a community. I think it's, a lot of people say, you're a traditional collector and do you buy into NFTs? And I'm like, well, you think about collecting traditional art, like Joe, you do a lot of great art collection. Art is about provenance, right? It's about rarity, and it's about supply and demand, right? So, and also art history, right? So if you look at rarity, you have the rarity in NFT art. You can see it because they tell you how rare it is, right? You know the supply and demand because you know how many they actually issue. And third, you don't have problem with traceability because the provenance, you know exactly where it actually is from, who is it from, because it's all traceable in blockchain. So and then fourth is that if you have a big community that you create this kind of fan base, I think NFT becomes something that is a little bit beyond traditional collecting. And that's something that I think it's actually quite interesting. And I'm actually studying as well. So what am I actually collecting? I'm actually collecting some of the crypto native artists. that uses generative art or digital art to create one-of-a-kind art, like people and many other younger artists. And of course, you have other NFTs like with PFP, with other collectors communities too, and those are great too. But for me, my direction is going on to these types of generative art and art that is similar to like people and other artists.
That's great. Well, sorry, we have to end this session because of time, and I really appreciate you guys' time. Adrian Cheng and Yat Siu, thank you very much. You guys are the experts, and we hope to hear more from you sometime in the future. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.